Coming up, Kansas state lawmaker Stephanie Byers says she isn't running for re-election. We learn more. Plus, we visit with another 2022 MacArthur Fellow. And the Native Authors Program says some writers are taking their words to the next level in its second year. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. Working with award-winning professors, Cronkite students learn news reporting, social media, shooting and editing videos, and producing content for communications industries. Cronkite's 15 professional programs give students the opportunity to cover critical issues throughout the U.S. and beyond. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Omadawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. We start in Washington, D.C., where new information about a Hallmark gathering has been announced. The White House says it will host its Tribal Nations Summit next month on November 30th and December 1st. The gathering will be an in-person event at the Department of the Interior in Washington, D.C. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said in a statement that President Joe Biden has prioritized tribal nations while in office. She said the gathering will focus on the major legislation signed into law this year, all of which included historic funding for Native communities. That includes the American Rescue Plan, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the Inflation Reduction Act. The White House Tribal Nation Summit is a chance for current tribal leaders to meet directly with senior-level officials of the Biden administration. Now to New Mexico, where the director of the Southwestern Association of Indian Arts seems to have exited her position. According to reporting by the Santa Fe New Mexican, Kim Pion is no longer with SWAYA. A board member and several others close to the matter told the paper that Pion is no longer the executive director, but did not say if she resigned or was fired. The organization Pion was in charge of organizes the well-known Santa Fe Indian Market. The state's Attorney General's office confirmed it is working with SWAYA after it received 2 complaints alleging that the nonprofit was behind on audit reports. Pion has been removed from SWAYA's website, but the organization has not formally made a statement about the situation. In Canada, any crime associated with unmarked graves at a former residential school will now be investigated by the jurisdictional police force. The announcement was made by a federal justice minister during a meeting with Indigenous leaders in Nova Scotia. Here's APTN's Angel Moore.
Chief Wally Burns of the James Smith Cree Nation knows tragedy firsthand. This after the stabbing attacks last month left 10 people dead and 18 injured in his community. He traveled to the East Coast to speak with federal and provincial justice and public safety ministers, calling for more Indigenous policing.
For the past month or so, I've been on the go nonstop and making sure that our voices are heard in regards to the tragedy that happened in James Smith.
Federal Justice Minister David Lametti, moved by Burns' presentation, says his government will take action.
We are moving as a government to recognizing Indigenous policing as an essential service and putting the mechanisms in place to make that a reality. So to do more than say that it's an essential service.
Kimberly Murray was also present. She is a special interlocutor for unmarked burials and missing children associated with former residential schools. She asked the ministers who should investigate unmarked graves.
So I was just flagging it as a concern that communities have been raising. And we are looking at what international solutions there are, and many communities are looking at the international solutions as well.
APTN News asked Lamedi about Murray's concerns. He responded that they're collaborating and working on solutions.
Criminal investigations in Canada are undertaken by the police of jurisdiction, and Kimberly Murray is trying to facilitate the legal or fill gaps in the legal apparatus as we move forward.
Indigenous leaders at the meeting were Cassidy Caron, president of the Métis National Council, and Nathan Obed, president of the Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami. Both were unavailable for comment, but ITK said in an email statement to APTN News they welcomed the opportunity to discuss MMIWG issues with the ministers. Lamedi says his government is implementing the MMIWG report.
We need to get together and discuss our various pathways and how they interoperate, how they fit together, so that we can move those calls forward in terms of implementation.
The ministers' meetings will continue till Friday. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Dartmouth, Nova Scotia.
In Bolivia, Indigenous models strutted the catwalk in beautiful garments. Last week, Aymara women paraded in their traditional multicolored clothing, with some taking it a step further by adding fluorescent colors. Nearly 70 Indigenous women took to the runway in the capital city. The event celebrated the 474th anniversary of the La Paz Foundation. Colombian designer Laura Lawrence, who created some of the pleated dresses and ponchos, says she was very impressed.
I am impressed because this is the way of preserving tradition through contemporaneity and reinventing themselves. The dresses, the jewelry, and everything that the skirt implies. I was happy to be able to make my interpretation of the Chola from La Paz.
Rodney Miranda, La Paz Culture Secretary, says the event was also a celebration of the strength and power of the Cholitas. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast.
Story can mean a lot of things to a lot of different communities, to a lot of different peoples. I think as humans, we search for stories and everything as a way to understand, as a way to process. My name is Sky Hopinka, and I'm an artist and a filmmaker. I like to work in moving image, written form, and photography. And I like to try to find different ways that those practices can intersect one another. So I make experimental films, I make documentary films, I make installation videos, I make photographs, and I like to write poems. What I'm interested in doing is to look at a more circular form of storytelling, or one that doesn't necessarily have a beginning, middle, and an end in the way that we're accustomed to living in the culture that we live in right now. My first film was a documentary. It tended to be viewed by an Indigenous audience. Having that sense of who an audience is, that was really something that opened up a lot of possibilities for me in figuring out how to tell stories that are not only important to my community, but important to me as an artist, as a filmmaker, as a person, and as a Ho-Chunk person. Once I started really seeing the possibilities of making films outside of more conventional forms, I've just been going ever since. I like to incorporate a lot of abstraction in my work, visual abstraction, sound abstraction, as a way of protecting some meaning, but also hopefully instilling a different way to interpret what you're seeing on screen. I like to play with translation a lot as well. The subtitles that I'm using, they begin somewhat legible, but then break down or open up into all the possibilities of what a word can mean and how it can be translated. And that just points to the power dynamics of who's making the choices and translating. The more that I can be seen as one small part of a larger constellation of works and voices that make up Indigenous peoples in this country, the better. I hope that these works will also instill a sense of curiosity for an audience that might not be familiar with Indigenous film to see that there's more out there than the things they might have encountered, if they've encountered any of them at all.
The prestigious MacArthur Foundation has announced its class of fellows for 2022. One of those fellows is Ho-Chunk citizen, filmmaker, and poet Sky Hopinka. The award-winning filmmaker's short and feature-length films move between both Indigenous history and current experiences. As part of the honor, Hopinka will also receive $800,000 in award money. Sandra Schulman has this interview.
Good morning, Sky. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So we're here to talk about your MacArthur Fellowship 2022 win, and congratulations on that.
Thank you so much.
So I know that you do films and work in multimedia. So what does this win mean to you, and what kind of work do you think you'll be doing with it?
It means a lot. It means a lot in a lot of different realms. Like one, I mean, like the financial support is going to be huge. I mean, just in alleviating some of the, I don't know, stresses that come with making art, making films, and primarily being self-funded. I mean, the other is just the sense of, I don't know, validation, recognition. I mean, the work that I've been doing for the last like 10 years has been primarily, I don't know, like I mean, more experimental, like more art focused. And I don't know, there just like really isn't a lot of support in the US for Indigenous artists, especially Indigenous artists working in experimental film.
So what kind of work, are you working on something now, or are you going to be doing a new project with this grant?
I'm going to, I mean, I'm just going to keep on with the projects I've been working on. I mean, like financial support has never really been a hindrance as far as just like if I have a camera and a microphone, I'm going to make something. And so like I've been finishing up a video installation, and I have a feature planned for next spring that I'm going to be shooting, and a few other features in development. So I mean, it's just, I don't know, further reason to keep on chugging away at it.
So there were two Indigenous winners this year. What do you think this means for the larger Native community to have this kind of big award given?
I'm not sure what it means for the larger Native community. I mean, it's just like, with all of the other previous Native winners as well, like, with Jeffrey Gibson, Natalie Diaz, it's just there's a lot of, I don't know, it's just there's a lot of work that is being done and has been done in the last, I don't know, however many years, long time. And it's just how can we continue building on that, and how can we be showing the world that there's just a larger Native creative community out there that are making poems, that are making films, that are making art, that are making movies, and just that there's so many, I don't know, there's so many more possibilities for more Native people to be, I don't know, seen in the world.
So you'll continue working obviously with Indigenous themes and imagery.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Now I know you were originally from the West Coast, and you're based in New York now, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How is that change in geographically affected your work, added to your work?
I don't know. I mean, it's been like I never thought that I would live on the East Coast. I mean, for I don't know, the first 25 years of my life, I lived in Washington, Oregon, California, and then went to grad school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to be close to my tribe and to family. And then I just found myself further east, and so as I kept on going like further and further east over the years, and I don't know, it just makes sense in a lot of ways. One, because I am continuing to work on issues of language and lands, and also understand what it means to be Native in different parts of the country with different histories. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure where I'll move next. I don't know. I have no idea where I'm gonna move next. But it's really shaped how, I don't know, how you see everything from a different perspective than just living entirely on the West Coast your entire life. But
okay, well, very good. Thank you, and congratulations again. And we look forward to the upcoming work.
Thank you.
When I first interviewed Kansas State Representative Stephanie Byers, she was running to be elected to office. At the time, she told me that her background as a former school teacher made her the perfect candidate. She was elected to office in 2020 and was one of 3 Indigenous women serving in the Kansas State House. Representative Byers is here today to tell us about her term and why she made the decision not to run for re-election. Hello, Representative Byers.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing very well. We're very excited that you're here, and I just want to jump right in here. Start us off by telling us why you aren't running for re-election.
Like many people across the country, I'm of an age where my parents and my wife's parents are, in that time of life where a lot of times the health conditions are not the best. And so we have chosen to no longer be in Kansas, but to move closer to her parents so that we can get back to them all the things that they gave to us when we were younger, be able to take care of our elders and be there for them as they continue aging in this time of life.
That's such a beautiful sacrifice to take on, as you just said, as they cared for you in your life. I want to talk about legislation, of course, that you're most proud of. If you had to, name a few, what would you say?
I think some of the stuff that we're most proud of, obviously in Kansas, we've had some legislation that have come through that offered opportunities for the people of Kansas to vote on a constitutional amendment. And we were able to maintain the fact that there should be an opportunity for people who are of birthing quality to be able to make decisions with their doctor and not be mandated by the state. A lot of the legislation that we've seen come through, are simple things. Sometimes we don't think about. We think about how we change how an antique auto is determined, or we talk about what has to happen with license plates on dump trucks. But most of what I've spent my time with has been working to defend current laws we have in the state of Kansas so they don't get changed to make them more discriminatory in practice.
You made history in 2020 as the first trans woman elected to the Kansas state legislature. Do you think that carried into your service? I know that you've been very outspoken about that.
Absolutely. We talk about representation and how much that it matters. Being someone who is transgender and in a conservative legislature where you would see bills come forward that would attack healthcare for trans youth or attack athletic opportunities for trans youth, having someone who has that identity be able to stand in those spaces and to speak on behalf of those peoples makes a tremendous impact for those around. It brings hope to those folks that are outside of the state house to know that there's someone like them standing in the places where those decisions are made.
Absolutely. And I mean, you just said representation is seen on a place like this, like that has never really been seen, both because you're a Native person, you're a Chickasaw, and also, as you just mentioned, because you're a trans woman. And I imagine to a lot of, Native people, that means a lot.
I think so. I think it makes a big difference, and oftentimes I think that the Native representation we have in state governments gets overlooked a little bit as well. There are different things that take place within governments that impact the Native nations that are within in Kansas, we have 4 Native nations here. Those impacts are very prominent. We've had an incident happen with our education commissioner who made an off-color joke, and that was negative towards Native Americans, and so bad that he offered his resignation. And the 3 of us that served in the state house were able to discuss and talk about what we can do with those things and make changes with our state board of education on how we look and deal with Native American culture and history within the public school systems of Kansas.
On Wednesday, we're actually going to have Representative Ponko Victors Kozad on our newscast, who's one of the 3 Indigenous women serving in the Kansas State House. Maybe talk about what it was like to serve with her and also with Representative Christina Haswood.
I have a unique relationship, I guess, with Ponko because the high school that she attended, I taught at. And so I've known her since she was a high school student. And watched her kind of grow up and get into those elected things. It was good to have the camaraderie of having both Christina Haswood and Ponko there, to look at Ponko with her experience of being in the legislature for as long as she has been, to look at Christina Haswood with the youth that she brought into it, as well as the activism that she's had within the Native American community, especially with the Haskell Indian University and with KU, University of Kansas, and to be able to kind of mold those together. The fact that the 3 of us come from very different backgrounds makes a huge difference too, because we represent different aspects of it. And while I am Chickasaw and we don't have a Chickasaw Nation here in Kansas, the Chickasaw Nation is in Oklahoma, we did pass legislation to recognize the Chickasaw plum as the state fruit of Kansas. So we've seen those things. We were able to work together to repatriate the cemetery to the Shawnee. And there are things that we can do those ways that help to bring that dignity back to the sovereignty of Native Americans within our states.
Well, Representative Byers, thank you so much for being here, and we wish you and your family the best.
Thank you. Chambashki.
These days, more and more Indigenous people are starting to write their own stories from their own perspectives. The Native American Community Development Institute and All My Relations Arts are helping with this effort. For the second year now, the groups are hosting the Native Authors Program. They've tapped Art Colson to lead the writers group to help them develop their focus. Art is a writer and published author himself. He's Cherokee, English, and Dutch and comes from a family of storytellers in all three traditions. Art Colson, welcome to our newscast.
Thank you for having me.
You have a pretty talented group of writers to work with. Give us an idea of who they are and what they've accomplished.
Yeah, we were really fortunate this year with the cohort that we just started with. We had about 3 times as many applications as we had slots, and we actually expanded the program this year to include more writers just because of the wealth of talent that came to us. We asked for writers in various genres. We have creative nonfiction, fiction, children and young adult, and poetry. And we try to find a really good mix of writers in all of those different genres to kind of work together. And one of the things we've been talking about in our initial meetings is how much we can learn from each other, how much a poet has to teach a fiction writer and how much a creative nonfiction writer has to teach a poet and that sort of thing. So it's a really great group of writers from the upper Midwest primarily, although we do have one writer from North Carolina and one from New York. So we come together online, and we've been meeting monthly, and we'll continue to meet over the next 15 months.
And overall, what is the goal of this program?
We let the writers determine what they need from the program. Overall, what we want to do is help the writers tell our stories. So many people write stories about us, who aren't, from our communities. And this gives writers from our communities a chance to tell our own stories. So working with each of the writers to develop the writing that they want to do, whether it be poetry or short stories, fictional works. And at the end of the program, what we're going to do is going to have a reading for the public, as well as publish an anthology as they did in the first cohort. So they'll be published in a book that will include works from all the writers. Very exciting for some writers who haven't been published already to see the work out there in print.
Can you talk about some of the topics that these writers will tackle? I mean, across Indian country, we interview writers a lot of the time who mention some pretty heavy topics, but also some really beautiful and happy ones.
Yeah, we just did our meeting earlier this week when we talked about, we did a little free writing. And each of the writers, we gave them some prompts, but they were really free to write whatever they wanted to. And the topics just ranged from very close and personal stories about relationships with family, or perhaps some trauma from the past that, we're revisiting. But some were very clever. Some had almost maybe what we would see as maybe spiritual, supernatural elements. We had some science fiction. So, we're not afraid to write in various genres, not thinking that we're going to have to be limited by what maybe the dominant culture sees as Native writing, but what we see as our own stories.
Art, I want to talk about your experience leading these writers, because I could imagine that it could sometimes feel a little daunting, but how do you approach this work personally?
Over my entire career as a writer, I was a journalist before I began writing children's books. And in my earlier career, I worked with the Native American Journalists Association, working each summer with the College Student Project, and got to work for many years with a lot of talented writers and young writers who were developing their practice and developing their skills. And so it's not something that's new to me. It's something I really enjoy doing. It's helping people tell the best version of their story.
That's a great segue into my next question, which is if anyone in this class would want to go into journalism.
I'm sure, there are some who would, we have several who are focusing on creative nonfiction. So writing, some stories that I would think of as maybe features that might be, well placed in a magazine or a newspaper or online. But we're not going to limit them in what they want to be. They have a lot of potential just looking at some of the ideas that they have and the goals that they've set for themselves for the 18 months, I think that we're going to see a lot of great writers come out of this program.
We only have a short time left here, but for the folks at home who are either watching this interview or listening to this interview and maybe want to learn more about this program in the future, how can they find more information?
Sure, if they go to the All My Relations Arts and the NACTI website would be a good place to start. They can learn about the program. And as you know, as they look at the website, they'll see that this is the second cohort. We've already done one group of writers who came through under the tutelage of Diane Wilson, a local writer here, Dakota writer. The program is really needed because this is a way for us to give young writers a boost as they start their careers and start telling our stories. So I think as people look into look at the website and start learning more about the program, they're going to see some of the great writers who are really going to make a mark in the future.
Well, Art, thank you so much for telling us about the Native Authors Program.
I was glad to be here. Thank you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.